you've had a good day, and I have had a good day too, we thank God. So today we are going to continue from where we left off during the last lesson that we had. And in the previous lessons, we've been talking about nutrition in plants and animals. And we started talking about nutrition in plants. And then the last bit will be nutrition in animals. So we've covered quite a lot, and we've talked about introduction, talked about the types and modes of nutrition. We've talked about heterotropism and autotropism. We've also gone ahead and talked about types of autotropism. We've also gone ahead and talked about internal parts of the leaf and the external parts of the leaf. We've also gone ahead and we've talked about adaptations of the leaf to photosynthesis. We've done some questions regarding the same, and we've also talked about the structure of the chloroplast. Remember, we said that the chloroplast is a cell organelle which is responsible for the process of photosynthesis. Now, inside the chloroplast, we looked at the internal parts of the chloroplast, which includes stroma, grana, starch, grain. We talked about the inner and the outer membrane. We also went ahead and talked about the process of photosynthesis. We said that the process of photosynthesis takes place through two stages. That is the light stage and the dark stage. But we said that the light stage is a light dependent stage, meaning sunlight must be present for the light stage to take place. So we also went ahead and talked about what happens in the light stage. We say that water is split into hydrogen atoms and oxygen by sunlight through a process known as photolysis. And we say that this takes place in the grana simply because the grana has chlorophyll, which traps the sunlight now, which is responsible for splitting water into hydrogen atoms and oxygen. So we also went ahead and talked about the fate of the products of the light stage. The products are the hydrogen atom and the oxygen. We say that the hydrogen atoms are taken to the dark stage, and oxygen is either used in the plant or it is released to the atmosphere. We went ahead and we also talked about the dark stage. We say that in the dark stage, we can also call it carbon 4 oxide fixation, because in this stage, hydrogen atoms are combined with carbon 4 oxide to form glucose and some water. And we say that this takes place in the stroma. And we say that the dark stage does not depend on sunlight. So therefore, whether there is sunlight or not, the dark stage will take place. However, we said there must first of all be light stage so that dark stage can take place. So without the light stage, there can be no dark stage. So we also looked at several questions, questions on photosynthesis process. We also introduced factors affecting the rate of photosynthesis, where we discussed light intensity. We also discussed carbon 4 oxide concentration, temperature, and availability of water. Those are the environmental factors which are responsible, which either increase the rate of photosynthesis or reduce the rate of photosynthesis. So we talked about all that, and we also talked about, actually we looked at some questions concerning the same. So today I want us to look at something. We also actually talked about this display here, how we can test whether photosynthesis took place by actually using what we call an iodine test or starch test. So for the lesson today, I want us to talk about something different. And I want us to talk about chemical compounds which constitute living organisms, or the chemical compounds of life. Now, Mr. Nelson, are you talking? Hey. Mr. Nelson? Because you are muted. Hey, Madam Mother, kindly make me a co-host. Imejitoa. Thank you. So, as I was saying, today I want us to talk about chemical compounds of life, and I want us to talk about what constitutes living organisms. And in chemical compounds of life, we're basically going to talk about the different types of food materials or substances that will make up a living organism or the cell of a living organism. In this subtopic, we're going to talk about carbohydrates, we're going to talk about lipids, we're going to talk about proteins, and we'll see the influence of these materials or how these substances are used in the body. So, in this, we will begin with carbohydrates. Now, what are carbohydrates and how are carbohydrates used in the body? So, anything that is a carbohydrate contains elements of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in the ratio of 1:2:1, meaning we have one molecule of carbon, then we have two of hydrogen, and one of oxygen. That makes up a carbohydrate. So anything that does not have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in the ratio of 1:2:1, then that is not a carbohydrate. Now these elements, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, are bonded to each other or are joined to one another by a bond known as glycosidic bond. So this bond is the one that joins carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen so that we can have carbohydrates. So a glycosidic bond is a bond that bonds or binds carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So in an exam, you should be able to tell or say that carbohydrates are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen elements in the ratio of 1 carbon is to 2 hydrogen is to 1 oxygen. Uses or functions of carbohydrates. How are carbohydrates used in the body? Functions or uses of carbohydrates. Now, who is going to tell us some of the uses of carbohydrates in the body? Anything that you know about the uses of carbohydrates in the body? Anyone? Anything that you know about carbohydrates and their uses in the body? Okay. Now, carbohydrates have several functions in the body. Like, for example, they are the sources or the major sources of energy in the body. Now, when we take in carbohydrates, we break down those carbohydrates that we have consumed and we use them in our body for energy. That is the reason why almost every meal that we consume has a portion of carbohydrates. Examples of those carbohydrates includes when you're taking ugali, there is the maize flour. When you're taking chapati, it is an example of a carbohydrate. So when you're taking, for example, something like bread, there's wheat, which is a carbohydrate. When you're taking arrowroots, when you're taking sweet potatoes, all those food substances are examples of food substances that have carbohydrates. So the reason why most of our diet has to comprise of carbohydrates is because the energy that we use in our bodies is majorly obtained from carbohydrates. So therefore, carbohydrates are sources of energy. Then we have the second function of carbohydrate is that they are storage forms of food. Carbohydrates are storage forms of food. If you remember very well, when we were discussing the process of photosynthesis, we talked about the after photosynthesis has taken place, the substance that is produced, or the simple sugar produced, glucose, has to be stored in plants. And since plants cannot store carbohydrates in form of glucose, then it has to be converted into starch. And we said the reason why glucose is converted into starch is because starch is insoluble. So therefore it is not going to alter the concentration of the cell. While if instead it was stored as glucose, glucose being soluble, it will dissolve in cells, increasing the concentration of the cells, and this would affect the way water is absorbed by the plants. So therefore, plants store carbohydrates in form of starch. In animals, carbohydrates are stored as glycogen. So therefore, we are saying that carbohydrates are storage forms of food. For example, in plants, they are stored as starch. In animals, they are stored as glycogen. The other importance of carbohydrate is that they are components of structures that provide mechanical support in organisms. They are components of structures that provide mechanical support in organisms. If I take you back to when we were introducing biology, we said that an animal cell and a plant cell are different because a plant cell has a structure known as a cell wall. And we said a cell wall prevents the plant cell from bursting even if it gains water from the surrounding. This is because the cell wall is made of a substance known as cellulose. And we mentioned and said that cellulose is an example of a complex carbohydrate. So that cellulose prevents the cell, a plant cell, from bursting. So therefore hapa ndio maana tunasema that carbohydrates are components of structures that provide mechanical support in organisms. For example, we have cellulose in cell walls, then we have chitin in exoskeleton, and lignin in xylem. We are going to see the type of carbohydrates that are used to strengthen or to provide mechanical support to organisms. Now that we know what are carbohydrates, and we've said there are compounds which are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in the ratio of 1:2:1 respectively, and we have also said that carbohydrates are used to provide energy in the body, and of course they are storage forms of food. Then let us talk about classes of carbohydrates. How can we group or classify carbohydrates? We can group and classify carbohydrates into three classes. There are three classes of carbohydrates. They include monosaccharides. Then the second class is disaccharide. The third class is polysaccharides. I repeat, the three classes of carbohydrates ni monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. And if you look at these, you will see that monosaccharides comes from the word mono. Monosaccharides comes from the word mono, and mono means one, moja. So therefore it means when we have one glucose component, so the simplest form of carbohydrate is mono, meaning it is just one molecule of carbohydrate. Monosaccharide, the simplest, mono, one, the simplest, just one. Then when you combine two monosaccharides, or when we combine two simple molecules of carbohydrates, we form a disaccharide. Di means two. A disaccharide, di means two. So when we have only one molecule of a carbohydrate, we have a monosaccharide. When we have two combined, we have a disaccharide. When we have more than two molecules or more than two monosaccharides, we form a polysaccharide. So therefore it is true to say that the simplest form of a carbohydrate is a monosaccharide. The simplest form of a carbohydrate is a monosaccharide. Why? Because when we take one monosaccharide and combine it with another, we form a disaccharide, another class of carbohydrate which is made up of two monosaccharides. And then when we combine more than two monosaccharides, we form a polysaccharide. So it is very important that you note that the three classes are based on how many molecules of glucose are present. So when you only have one molecule of glucose, then we have a monosaccharide. When we have two monosaccharides combined, two of them form a disaccharide, and when there are more than two, they become a polysaccharide. So let us talk about monosaccharides in details or in length. Now, monosaccharides are simple sugars. In short, they are the simplest forms of carbohydrates. This means we do not have any simpler form of a carbohydrate. This is the lowest level of a carbohydrate. And their general formula ni CH2O. Na ukiangalia vizuri hapa utaona C ni carbon, one molecule of carbon, H2, meaning how many molecules of hydrogen are there? 2. And then we have O, which is oxygen, which is 1. So therefore, if you look at this formula, you will see that we have one carbon, two hydrogens, and one oxygen. Just like the way we said when we're introducing carbohydrates, that carbohydrates are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen in the ratio of 1:2. And therefore, we say that the formula is CH2O into bracket N, where N is equals to 6. Hii ni kumaanisha hapa kuko na N, we substitute it with a 6. So what is the formula of a monosaccharide? It is 6 times 1 carbon, which is C6, then 6 times 2 hydrogens, which is H12, and then 6 times 1 oxygen, which is O6. So therefore, the complete formula for a monosaccharide is C6H12O6. So because we have said the formula for monosaccharides is CH2O, where N is 6. Examples of monosaccharides. So number one, we have glucose. Now this is quite simple and easy to understand. This is the glucose kama yenye tunanunuanga kwa duka, ama yenye when athletes or some footballers or watu wenye wanakimbia, when they run or they engage in an exercise, the glucose they are given to leak so that they can add more energy into their body. So the reason why they are given glucose is because glucose has already been broken down to the simplest form. So when they take in that glucose, it will be taken directly into the bloodstream and it will be used for the process of respiration. So therefore, mtu mwenye anakimbia ama mwenye anacheza mpira ama mwenye ana engage in a very vigorous exercise, hauwezi ukampea carbohydrate yenye ni complex, kwa sababu ni kumaanisha lazima adigest iende hadi ikuwe the simplest form. That is why they are given glucose instead of any other complex carbohydrate. So example number one ni glucose. Example number two is fructose, and fructose is found in fruits which are ripe, like when you take mangoes, when you take oranges, when you take bananas. Those fruits that are ripe, when you consume them, you get fructose. Another very good source of fructose is honey. So the type of carbohydrate that you get from honey is fructose. And also the type of carbohydrate which you get when you take ripe fruits, it is fructose. So in an exam they can ask you, give the sources of fructose. You say ripe fruits and honey. And then the third type of monosaccharide is galactose. And galactose is found in milk. No wonder we say this person is lactose intolerant, meaning there's some lactose in the milk. So galactose is the simplest form of that carbohydrate in milk. So then we have, what are the functions of monosaccharides? Hizi monosaccharides zinatumika aje na kwa nini kwa mwili? Na reason number one, ama function number one of a monosaccharide is it is used in respiration to provide energy. The reason why an athlete is given glucose when they have run, ama they've run, it's so that they can get energy which they have been using for running being rejuvenated or being restored. Or even in case they want to continue performing at the highest level, they need more energy, and that energy will come from glucose. So therefore, glucose or a monosaccharide is used in respiration to produce energy. The other function of a monosaccharide is that when condensed, they are storage forms of food. So when you combine very many monosaccharides, you can form starch and glucose like we are going to see. So therefore, the most important thing to note about the monosaccharides here is the examples, which is glucose, fructose, and galactose. And it is also very important that you note that monosaccharides are used to provide energy in the body. Properties of monosaccharides. Properties basically means characteristics. So how will you know that this is a monosaccharide? Like for example, ukipewa kitu na uambiwe determine whether this is a monosaccharide. Umeenda tu ukapewa tu a substance na mtu akakwambia how do you determine ama kindly determine whether this is a monosaccharide. The following are easy ways of knowing whether something is a monosaccharide or not. The first test that you're supposed to carry is the solubility test. So whatever you have been given, dissolve it in water. And if it dissolves in water, then there's a high likelihood that that is a monosaccharide. So ukiweza pewa anything, wambiwa determine whether it is a monosaccharide, the first thing that you do is to dissolve it in water. And when you dissolve it in water and it dissolves, then that suggests it could be a monosaccharide. So property number one or characteristic number one of monosaccharides, they dissolve in water easily. The other characteristic of a monosaccharide is that they are reducing sugars. They are reducing sugars. Now this is an experiment which you're going to carry out when we plan for one experiment, because we need to carry out tests for carbohydrates. We look at the test for reducing sugars and unreducing sugars. So we can suspend that characteristic for now because we're going to do a practical activity on that. But it is important that you note that monosaccharides are reducing sugars. Now, after monosaccharides have dissolved in water, they form sweet tasting solutions. Niko sure ukiweza chukua maji warm alafu dissolve honey hapo ndani, the honey is going to make that water very sweet. So therefore, all monosaccharides easily dissolve in water and they form sweet tasting solutions. So they have a sweet taste and they dissolve in water. And then finally, the last characteristic of a monosaccharide is that they form crystals or they can be crystallized. Now, what is crystallization? Crystallization is basically converting a liquid form of a monosaccharide into a solid form of a monosaccharide. Like for example, unaweza chukua glucose, you dissolve it in water to form a glucose solution. If you want to retain or if you want to have glucose back, if you want to regain the glucose which you dissolved in water, you can take the mixture of glucose and water and you heat it. So when you heat it, water will evaporate, leaving glucose crystals behind. So water is going to evaporate, leaving crystals of the glucose behind. And that's what we call crystallization. And that's why we are saying that monosaccharides can be crystallized or they can form crystals once they dissolve in water and you heat the solution or the mixture to evaporate. The one get from this area on monosaccharides ni list properties of a monosaccharide. And then you can also get a question asking you to give examples of monosaccharides. Or they can actually ask you to state one function of a monosaccharide, which should be very easy. You should just state that it is used in energy synthesis. Very good. Now that we have understood what are monosaccharides, if we take a glucose and we combine with another molecule of glucose, we form a disaccharide. Remember nimesema there are three classes of carbohydrates. Number one, we have monosaccharides. Number two, we have disaccharides. And number three, we have polysaccharides. So when you combine just two, when you combine two monosaccharides, you form a disaccharide. And therefore, let us talk about disaccharides. Now, so disaccharides are formed by combining two monosaccharides in a process known as condensation. So when you take one monosaccharide and you condense it or you combine it with another monosaccharide, we refer to that as condensation and it gives you a disaccharide. Examples of disaccharides include maltose, sucrose, and lactose. Now, the process of combining two monosaccharides, sorry? Okay, sorry for that. Now, when you combine two monosaccharides, you form a disaccharide. For example, if you look at this equation that is shown here, there's this equation that is shown here, this equation here, that one, it is showing how a monosaccharide and a monosaccharide can be combined to form a disaccharide plus water. And we have said the process of combining two monosaccharides to form a disaccharide is known as condensation, bringing together. So, what are the products of combining two monosaccharides? We form a disaccharide and we form water. So, for example, how is maltose formed? Maltose is formed when you combine two glucose molecules. Remember hapo nyuma tumesema examples of monosaccharides ni nini? We have glucose, we have fructose, and we have galactose. So when you combine one molecule of glucose with another, you form maltose. So maltose is made from combining two glucose molecules through the process known as condensation. Which are the products formed? Maltose and water. Okay, so maltose can be found in germinating seeds. So when a seed is germinating, kama tuseme umepanda mahindi na imeanza kugerminate leo, hiyo mahindi yenye imeanza kugerminate, if you test the type of monosaccharide that is present in the germinating seed, you'll find that most of it is maltose. So maltose is formed when you combine two glucose molecules, and glucose molecules, of course, are monosaccharides. Then we have another one. We have sucrose, which is an example of a disaccharide. So how do we form sucrose? Now, sucrose is formed when glucose and fructose combine. When you combine glucose and fructose through the process of condensation, you form a disaccharide known as sucrose, and of course, water is also formed. Now, a question is, where can we find sucrose? One of the most common source of sucrose is sugarcane. So ile utamu yenye unasikianga ukikula miwa ama ukikunywa juice ya miwa, hiyo utamu inaitwa sucrose. Na tumesema Sucrose is a disaccharide, meaning there are two molecules of carbohydrates. Which are the two molecules of carbohydrates that combine to form sucrose? Glucose and fructose. And they give you sucrose. And then finally, the third type of a disaccharide is lactose. Now, lactose, of course, is found in milk, and it is formed by combining glucose and galactose. Kuna kitu moja nataka hapa understand na uelewe na unote. Glucose is constant all over. Kwa kutengeneza maltose, tumetengeneza na glucose and glucose. Two molecules of glucose will form a disaccharide known as maltose plus water. When you combine glucose and fructose, you form sucrose. Glucose and fructose, you form sucrose. So fructose is a monosaccharide and so is glucose. So that gives you sucrose. Then we have lactose, which is formed by combining glucose and galactose. Glucose and galactose. So galactose and glucose form lactose and water. And the process through which the two are combined, it's known as condensation. So if we have understood how we form disaccharides, let us talk about properties of disaccharides. And before we even check to see the properties of disaccharides, there's something that we can be able to tell on the characteristics without even confirming anywhere. Now tumesema sucrose is found in sugarcane. So sugarcane juice is sucrose. Now, how does sucrose taste? Is it sweet? Is it sour? Is it tasteless? So kama umewahi kula miwa unajua miwa iko na skari na skari ya miwa ni tamu. So therefore, give me one characteristic or property of a disaccharide. Of course, you guessed it. They are sweet tasting. So all disaccharides are sweet tasting. They form sweet taste. Even if you dissolve them in water, they will be very, very sweet. Another characteristic or property of a disaccharide is that they are soluble in water. If you are to take sucrose or if you are to take maltose and dissolve it in water, it will readily dissolve in water. And the solution which is going to be formed from that that mixture of water and a disaccharide, it will be sweet tasting. The other characteristic of disaccharides is that some disaccharides are reducing sugars while some are non-reducing sugars. Some disaccharides are reducing sugars while some are non-reducing sugars. I've said on this characteristic of reducing and non-reducing sugars, it would be better and well understood if we did an experiment. So that means when we'll be doing experiments or practicals, we are going to include a practical activity on testing what's a reducing sugar and what's a non-reducing sugars, and I'm going to explain in depth, and we are going actually to see how it works so that we can say that something is a reducing sugar or something is a non-reducing sugars. So therefore, we say that the three major characteristics of disaccharides ni they are soluble in water, they have a sweet taste or they form sweet tasting solutions, and they can easily be broken down into monosaccharides. What does that mean? That means with us here, we have, for example, a disaccharide maltose. Hii maltose imetengenezwa na glucose. So when we have two molecules of glucose combined together, they give you maltose. So when they give you maltose, you can actually break down maltose into respective molecules of monosaccharides that had been combined to form maltose. So in as much as we're saying we can combine two molecules of glucose to form maltose through condensation, we can break down maltose into two molecules of monosaccharides through a process known as hydrolysis. Hydrolysis means adding water or breaking down in presence of water. So tunaweza tengeneza disaccharides tukitumia molecules mbili za monosaccharides, ama tunaweza break down disaccharide ndio tupate the two molecules of monosaccharides that were combined to form the disaccharide. So, and that process, of course, is known as hydrolysis. Now, that is what we form when we combine two molecules of carbohydrates, or sorry, of monosaccharides. So, two molecules of monosaccharides give you disaccharides. Now, how do you form polysaccharides? Polysaccharides are formed when you may combine more than two monosaccharides. Now, before we talk about polysaccharides, let's see how hydrolysis can take place. So, when you look at this illustration that I have here, we can have a disaccharide plus water. I'm talking about the first illustration here. The first, this one here, the one that I've circled, that piece of information. So a disaccharide plus water. So that means we are adding water to break down a disaccharide. So when a disaccharide is broken down in presence of water, that process is known as hydrolysis, and it gives you two monosaccharide molecules because disaccharides are made up of two monosaccharides. For example, a maltose is an example of a disaccharide. And if you break down maltose in presence of water, it is going to give you a glucose plus glucose. And glucose is a monosaccharide. So therefore, when you break down maltose in presence of water through a process known as hydrolysis, this gives you two molecules of monosaccharides, glucose. If in case you took lactose and you broke it down in presence of water, it would give you the constituent monosaccharides which were used to make lactose, that is glucose and galactose. So when you break down lactose in presence of water through the process known as hydrolysis, you get glucose and galactose. When you take sucrose and you break it in presence of water, it will give you the constituent or the monosaccharides that make up that sucrose, which is glucose and fructose. So therefore, the reaction that forces two monosaccharides to combine to form a disaccharide can be reversed to break down the disaccharide into the constituent monosaccharides that make up that disaccharide. I hope that is noted because it is very, very important. So that is how hydrolysis can take place. So therefore, now that we've talked about monosaccharides and disaccharides, let us talk about polysaccharides. Polysaccharides are complex forms of carbohydrates, and they are formed when more than two molecules of disaccharides combine. I repeat, polysaccharides are complex forms of carbohydrates and are formed when more than two molecules of monosaccharides combine. Remember tumesema disaccharide means two, di means two. That means when two monosaccharides are combined. When more than two are combined, they form polysaccharides. What are the examples of polysaccharides? Examples of polysaccharides include, number one, we have starch, and starch is stored in plant tissues. So, every carbohydrate that we consume from plants, it is starch. A very good example ni maize. When you're eating githeri ama mahindi choma ama mahindi ya kuchemsha, the type of carbohydrates you're consuming is a polysaccharide, a complex carbohydrate. When you take anything that is made of wheat, that is mandazis or chapati or pancakes or any food that is made of wheat, you are consuming a complex carbohydrate which is wheat. When you take a potato, like for example, when you take chips, when you take mashed potatoes, when you take potatoes in any other food like rice ama tuseme imetengenezwa na stew, that type of carbohydrate that you're consuming is starch, and it is a complex carbohydrate. When you consume rice, you are consuming a complex form of a carbohydrate which is known as starch. So therefore, starch is a complex carbohydrate that is stored in plant tissues. Then we have another example of a polysaccharide, which is glycogen. It is glycogen. Now, glycogen is found in animal tissues. It is very important that you note these two things. You should note that you find starch in plant tissues and you find glycogen in animal tissues. So therefore, if for example you're consuming meat, the type of carbohydrate that is present in those tissues that you're consuming in meat can only be glycogen. The type of carbohydrates you are consuming when you're consuming a plant product, especially the ones which I have mentioned above here, that is starch. We have other examples of polysaccharides such as cellulose. And cellulose is found in walls of the plant cells. And then we have chitin. Chitin is found on the exoskeleton of arthropods. Now, we have two words here. These words are very important to understand because they will form or inform our understanding. We have the first term, which is exoskeleton, and then we have the second term, which is arthropods. Now, what's an exoskeleton? Exo comes from the word external. I'm sure you've come across a cockroach. I'm sure you've come across a crab. I'm sure you've come across maybe a locust or a grasshopper. And you have seen that those animals that I've mentioned, they have an external structure that is very hard. The external part of their body is very hard. The way you touch your body and find that your body is at least soft, you have a soft skin, the external structures of cockroach, the external structure of a locust or a grasshopper or a crab or a lobster, they are very, very hard. The reason why they are hard is because they are made of an external polysaccharide known as chitin. So an exoskeleton is a skeleton that is found on the outside of the organism. And I've given you examples of organisms that have exoskeletons. Now, what are arthropods? Arthropods are those organisms that mostly their bodies are segmented. Kama venye ukiangalia insect kama tuseme housefly ama a bee ama maybe a butterfly, utaona abdomen yake imegawanishwa into very many segments. Ni kama iko na segments mingi sana, ni kama imegawanishwa mara mingi. Unlike us, mwili yetu haiko segmented. So if you want to know an arthropod, unaangalia abdomen, unaangalia kama imedividiwa into very many parts. Those ones are what we call segments, and segments of course indicate that an organism is an arthropod. So we are saying if you want to see a chitin or a polysaccharide known as chitin, take an arthropod, an organism whose body is segmented, mostly insects. And then when you touch the external part of that organism, then you will see an exoskeleton which is made of chitin. So therefore we are saying chitin is found in exoskeletons of arthropods. Very good. And then finally we have a third example of a polysaccharide, which is lignin. And lignin is mostly found in the xylem of in the xylem and tracheids, and their function is to provide mechanical support. So basically those are the types of polysaccharides or examples of polysaccharides. In an exam, you can get a question asking you list 3 examples of polysaccharides and state where they can be found. So when you say starch, you say in plant tissues. When you say glycogen, you'll say in animal tissues. When you say cellulose, you will say in cell walls. When you say chitin, you will say in exoskeletons of arthropods. And when you say lignin, you will say in the xylem vessels or in tracheids. Properties of polysaccharides. Properties is the same as characteristics of polysaccharides. Now, remember tumesema one good example of a polysaccharide ni kitu kama starch. Na starch ni yenye imepatikana kwa nini? Kwa mahindi, kwa waru, Irish potato, it is found in rice, it is found in wheat, it is found in most of the plant tissues. So characteristics zake ni kama gani? This should be very easy. Every time you hear the word polysaccharide, think of rice or maize and ask yourself, solutions, because in the first place, they do not dissolve in water.
Mr. Nelson, ni kama network imepotea. Mr. Nelson? Wacha tuone kama atarudi.